Chiang Kai-shek in Nanjing was in no happy mood. He heaved a deep sigh of sorrow. Huizan, alas, your soul, come back, please. Afterwards, Chiang Kai-shek mobilized troops and mustered up everything he could and used various tactics, such as to move forward by stealth and strike sure blows, consolidating at every step, advance at different stages, strike at the same time, coordinate and help one another, and dive straight in. Mao Zedong, on the other hand, used the tactics of luring the enemy into encirclement and turning the tables. The KMT troops were chased away, completely defeated. The Red Base area was not only preserved, but it had been extended and the Central Soviet area had been strengthened.
Why did Mao Zedong prefer luring the enemy into encirclement so much? Fundamentally, it was a strategy for a disadvantaged army to encounter a strong army. At the same time, it was also a strategy to defeat a strong army. The weak Red Army wanted to defeat the strong enemy. Effective strategies and operational methods must be developed according to the actual circumstances. There was still another factor. The dominance of the enemy could only be overcome with the support of the local people.
Mao said, "When we fight a war, the people come out to help us. So the enemy cannot judge how many troops we could have, and they get nervous. The people hide provisions and livestock. The enemy cannot find any firewood, cooking oil, or rice. So the enemy is doomed to fail, and we are sure to win." The ultimate purpose of luring the enemy into encirclement was to preserve their forces and turn the tables. Mao Zedong summarized them into 6 categories. The people that actively supported the Red Army, the fields that were favorable to us in fighting, the concentration of the main Red Army forces, to find out the enemy's weak points, to exhaust the enemy and make them feel dejected, to lead the enemy to make mistakes. Luring the enemy was only the means. Defeating the enemy was the actual purpose. This was the gist of Mao Zedong's tactics.
It must be pointed out that Mao Zedong's luring the enemy into encirclement was by no means a passive avoidance of the enemy or a passive avoidance of fighting. On the contrary, it was the skill of holding out and letting go at opportune times. Without persistent holding out, there wouldn't be any skillful luring. To have the enemy tied down by holding out and to bring out the enemy. To feign a weak point so that the enemy would take the bait. To divide and exhaust the enemy and to get the upper hand. To fight backwards and kill the enemy one by one. It concerned a series of well-planned and interdependent strategic and warfare procedures. Mao Zedong mastered the minute details of war proficiently. That's why he could make the use of luring the enemy into the encirclement to a degree of perfection.
During the War of Liberation, the CPC army had fought wars, one after another. This strategy was the trump card in changing the situation of the war against key assaults by the KMT on the borders of Shanxi, Gansu, and Ningxia. The CPC army was outnumbered by the KMT army 10-1. The Northwest Field Army was poorly armed. The basic policy designed by Mao Zedong for the Northwest battlefield was luring the enemy into encirclement, dealing with the enemy in northern Shanxi, rendering the enemy extremely tired, causing the enemy to run out of food provisions, then taking the best opportunity to wipe out the enemy one by one with a concentrated force. After the KMT troops, directed by Hu Zongnan, had occupied Yan'an, thinking that they had won the war, But they failed to detect any tracks and traces of the Northwest Field Army. The commander and political commissar of the Northwest Field Army, Peng Dehuai, took advantage of such a good chance and set up a trap at Qinghuibian. One brigade of the KMT army was destroyed within only 1.5 hours. Hu Zongnan, however, thought he had encountered the main forces of the Northwest Field Army. So he instructed his army to march north at full speed, hoping to launch a decisive battle. Mao Zedong immediately instructed Peng Dehuai, "What matters now? Avoid engagement with their main forces and hide to wait for a good opportunity." Peng Dehuai dispatched a crack detachment which had led Hu's main forces around in the gullies and hills of the northeast military regions of Yan'an. KMT troops became very tired. Hu Zongnan, employing a tactic called rolling the tube, forming a square formation, had them marched in unison. In this way, they moved on like a roller, so that the Northwest Field Army could not find any chance to divide the enemy and fight. Once again, Mao Zedong instructed Peng Dehuai, "My principle is to continue our practice and deal with the enemy in the region for another period of time, another month. The purpose is to render the enemy totally exhausted and put their food provisions into extremely short supply. Then we can destroy them at a proper opportunity."
Mao Zedong named these tactics wear and tear. It was to avoid direct engagement with the enemy when they are fresh and energetic, and to fight them when they get exhausted. Exhaust the enemy to their last breath, then have them wiped out. It was a new development of luring the enemy into encirclement according to new situations of war. These tactics were employed by the People's Liberation Army in general on other battlefields. They greatly contributed to the fighting against strong assaults by the KMT. Relatively speaking, the assault mounted by Chiang Kai-shek on the liberated regions was worn down to a large extent.
The tactics of wear and tear had become the final moments of the rolling tube formation. Peng Dehuai played with the enemy patiently and finally had found the opportunity. Later, he occupied Panlong, and another brigade of Hu's army was destroyed. The Northwest Field Army fought 3 battles and won all of them. This had turned the tables on the enemy in northern Shanxi battlefield. As a result, it contributed greatly to the People's Liberation Army on other battlefields. By giving up Yan'an and luring the enemy into encirclement, Mao Zedong had reversed the war situation at the expense of only one city. Such strategy would be unbelievable to some. 2 years later, the US government commented in a white paper, "The KMT's occupation of Yan'an was once claimed as a great victory. It was actually practically a wasteful, void, and unworthy victory." Chiang Kai-shek and his commanders had tried to find out the reasons time and time again, but they failed to find a satisfactory explanation for themselves. They said with remorse, some suggested sudden and violent assaults or ambush assaults, but to no avail. The problems that puzzled Chiang Kai-shek were totally incomprehensible to foreign parties. Clement, the commander of US Marine Corps stationed in Qingdao, once asked Chen Yi what to do if a war breaks out between the CPC and the KMT. Chen Yi answered, "Go all out and lure the enemy into encirclement. Concentrate the forces to destroy the enemy." Clement was astounded, saying, "I don't understand. You want both to give up the land and to kill the enemy as well. Too complex, these Chinese affairs." With the cracking sound of gun salutes, with the fireworks in the sky, the Chinese people had their own regime. How to protect the newly born people's regime? Mao Zedong thought for a long time. He once said, "We have a large country. The coastal line alone exceeds 10,000 kilometers. If the enemy decides to invade us, to keep them out completely is not possible. If you stop him at this place, he could come in at another place. Faced with such a long line of defense, to construct defensive works everywhere and to set up defense everywhere won't work. If we uniformly distribute the troops, we will not have a strong point and cannot form a strong fist. As a result, the enemy could come to attack us from everywhere, and we can do nothing other than be defeated. This practice wouldn't be a clever method." Davidson, the former assistant to the US Defense Secretary, once summarized, "If you could not remember Mao, one matter you cannot forget is that he is a strategist that uses the most critical perspective in assimilating the past experiences and exerts most importance to practical situation." Mao Zedong's life was accompanied by books. Books occupied half the area of his big wooden bed. He usually left fine, closely spaced comments on the books he had read. He studied history, but would never stick to it blindly. He learned from history, but he would never copy it indiscriminately. Mao Zedong learned from history, summarized history, and then created history according to actual conditions. This was the portrait of Mao Zedong, a good reader of history books. Mao had a special liking for the tactics of luring the enemy into encirclement. He employed the tactics perfectly and skillfully, and had scored a success in each battle. In his old age, Mao Zedong once talked about history intriguingly and kindly in a meeting on principles of strategy. He commented, "I have studied history recently. I found that so long as an army manages to lure the enemy into encirclement, they could have the enemy destroyed. So long as an army had tasted an initial victory and was so happy and confident as to penetrate into enemies' lands, they would end up in defeat." He had yet finished his comments and added, "If you don't let the enemy have some initial taste of victory, they will not come further. It is advisable to study this issue regularly." famous US journalist Anna Louise Strong once described the different dancing styles of several CPC leaders. Zhou Enlai's waltz was first class. Liu Shaoqi's steps were as precise as mathematics. Zhu De's steps looked like long march strides, while Mao Zedong's steps were usually unexpected. He always danced to his own rhythms. When Mao Zedong was dancing on the stage of war, he would emphasize his own initiative even more than on the dance floor. He would advance or withdraw to his own rhythms. He would compel the enemy to act according to those rhythms. He directed battles in his own style and won the battles with a dance of grace. After the foundation of the PRC, when he was talking about the key to the success of battles and wars, he commented, "There is nothing mysterious about war. Fight if you could win. Withdraw if you couldn't. You fight your way, I fight my way." Those simple sentences revealed the dialectic relationship between initiative and flexibility, between fighting and withdrawal. This duality can explain almost all the wars and battles in the history of the Revolutionary War of China. They were the gist of the strategy and tactics of the People's Army. Every army man understands, to win a war, one must avoid being passive. One must seize the initiative. Initiative is the mother of victory. The army with initiative can often operate from a strategically advantageous position and conquer everything in its way.
The Revolutionary War of China had a basic characteristic. The enemy was stronger than us. The People's Army remained basically in a strategically passive position. To seize the initiative was of utmost importance to the People's Army. How to gain the initiatives in battles and wars? This was a problem that had to be solved, and its solution was necessary for the PRC to succeed in the Revolutionary War of China.
At their initial stages, the CPC members paid a high cost in search for the answer. The Nanchang Uprising, the Autumn Harvest Uprising and the Guangzhou Uprising, all raising a red flag at first and then charging eye-catching troops directly at the enemy's army. Brave and emotionally moving as it was, they suffered a great loss without exception. Mao Zedong was the beginning of a new trend in the military leadership within the CPC. Just after the Autumn Harvest Uprising, Mao argued at the Front Committee meeting that the CPC army should give up the assault on Changsha and should move toward the rural areas where the enemy had a weak ruling. At the Gucheng meeting, Mao Zedong made a decision to march toward Qingkang Mountains. On the bamboo and mist-covered Qingkang Mountains, Mao Zedong continued his search for a stratagem to seize the initiative.
Zhu Kongyang, known as Deaf Man Zhu, had been a local warlord of Qingkang Mountains for dozens of years. No matter how hard the local government tried to suppress him, he could always contrive to escape. His survival secret was, don't worry about fighting, so long as you are good at circling. Fight if you can win, otherwise just run away. If you can't run away fast enough, then just hide yourself. If you can't hide yourself as quickly as you wish, then just evaporate. Mao Zedong was inspired by it, saying, our way to handle the enemy depends on the number of the enemy troops and their situations. Fight if we can win, withdraw if we cannot. We will not fight a losing war.
The abstract principles were made clear by Mao Zedong's simple words. These principles looked absurd and overly simplistic to traditional strategists, but they were quite effective.
Fight if you can win, withdraw if you cannot. It described accurately and clearly the dialectic relation between fighting and withdrawal. It was also the most appropriate explanation to the target of annihilating the enemy army and preserving our own army. Fight if you can win was about choosing offensive maneuvers. It emphasized assault, quick war, and quick decisions. Withdraw if you cannot was about mobility. It disapproved sticking to a city, a location, or a stronghold. If it is not advantageous to fight here, just try to move away and find another place to attack.
In June of 1931, Chiang Kai-shek personally commanded troops and brought with him foreign military consultants to launch the third encircling and suppression against the Central Soviet area. He swore to wipe out the Red Army within 3 months. To win or to die. If I fail, I shall take my own life. The Red Army was outnumbered by the KMT army. Mao Zedong and Zhu De instructed the Red Army troops, who had been dispatched to do the mass work, to gather at Gaoxing Wei to the northwest of Xingguo and to wait there for a good opportunity to destroy the enemy. When he detected the main force of the Red Army, Chiang Kai-shek concentrated 9 divisions in a frontal assault and slung their full weight upon Xingguo. However, Mao Zedong avoided Chiang's strong force and designed the principle of avoiding the enemy's main force, fighting its weak points. He planned to destroy, from the west to the east, the enemy's liaison line behind Chiang's army. This would compel the enemy's main force to turn back. The Red Army would then attack the enemy's troops when they became exhausted. But the KMT's 2 largest divisions arrived at Futian earlier than expected. Mao Zedong changed his plan instantly and led the main force back to Gaoxing Wei secretly and stationed them there, waiting for a good opportunity. By then, the KMT troops had encircled the Red Army within a narrow strip of land only a few dozen kilometers in circumference. The situation was extremely dangerous for the CPC. But Mao Zedong still chose to be on the move, so as to gain the initiative and find combat opportunities. He directed the main force to cross the mountainous area and sneak out of the encirclement ring between a 20-kilometer gap in the enemy's troops. Then they mounted a surprise attack on the weak force of the KMT. Then they moved out of the battlefield quickly, where they annihilated the greater part of 1 division. After the battle, the Red Army was prepared to seize Longgang while they were at it. Finding Longgang was securely guarded by the KMT troops, Mao Zedong once again changed his mind. He launched a surprise assault on Huangpi fiercely, in heavy rains, and annihilated 4 regiments of the KMT troops. The Red Army fought 3 battles and won all of them. As to Chiang Kai-shek, he was shamed into anger. He instructed all the troops to march eastward quickly and to form a dense encirclement upon the Red Army. He ordered, "Raze everything to the ground that lies within the region of 13 kilometers around Donggu. Spare nobody." Once again, the Red Army was encircled by KMT troops. Mao Zedong arranged the 12th Army to act as the main force and to feign a false deployment. And the KMT main force was led toward the northwest, while the main force of the Red Army advanced quickly and secretly towards the west. The main force sneaked out of the encirclement ring via a 10-kilometer void between the KMT troops. They finally arrived at the northeast of Xingguo. There they hid and refreshed. The KMT troops followed the troops around for nearly half a month before they realized that the main force of the Red Army was at Xingguo. They had to turn back. By that time, the main force of the Red Army had fully recovered and left Xingguo. The KMT army had once again failed to find the main force. The KMT troops had run out of food. The KMT troops could not continue pursuing and had to retreat. What Mao Zedong had waited for was exactly this type of opportunity. He immediately directed the main force of the Red Army to pursue and attack the enemy. The third encircling and suppression campaign by the KMT was thus defeated. 3 months passed. Chiang Kai-shek, of course, would not take his own life. Nevertheless, he was so angry that he vomited blood. He returned to Nanjing pessimistically.
Some say the victory of the Chinese Revolution was achieved by walking. This saying is somewhat accurate. As a conclusion, Mao Zedong said that defeating an army by only walking could work under 4 situations. First, when we were outnumbered by the enemy and encountered. Second, if the encountered enemy was not many, but their reinforcements were very near. Third, when the encountered enemy was not isolated and they occupied a stronghold. 4. When fighting could not decide the battle and it's not advisable to continue the fighting.
Admittedly, Mao Zedong had been defeated in battles, but he would never repeat the same mistakes and could always learn from his own failures. Walking, then, was the basic way of such transformation. The Tucheng battle during the Long March was such an instance. Mao Zedong had intended to annihilate the Sichuan army at Tucheng so as to create a passage to cross the Yangtze River to the north. However, after 1 day of fierce fighting, the Sichuan army was not destroyed. On the contrary, the Red Army found themselves in a dangerous situation. Mao Zedong then decisively gave up his plan of crossing the Yangtze River. He directed the Red Army to walk away. They walked through the mountains in Sichuan, Yunnan, and Guizhou. His walking gave rise to 4 crossings of the Qishui River, a masterpiece maneuver in Chinese military history. His walking directed the Red Army to a bright future. During the period of the War of Liberation, when the battles were placed against a broader background, Mao Zedong's strategy of fight if you can win, withdraw if you cannot, became further enriched. Under his arrangement, the commanders of all the major war zones brought walking into full play. In order to counterattack the KMT troops who were launching attacks according to a tactic known as marching divided, attacking converged. The East China Field Army, under the direction of Qin Yi and Su Yu, annihilated one troop and then retreated 1 step on Middle Jiangsu battlefield, Northern Jiangsu battlefield, and Southern Shandong battlefield. Shanxi, Hebei, Shandong, and Henan Field Army, under the direction of Yu Bocheng and Dong Xiaoping, took advantage of the fact that the KMT troops were sparsely deployed and were poorly guarded in the rear flanks. Northeast Democratic Allied Army, led by Lin Biao and Luo Ronghuan, they mounted long-distance assaults, marched down to the south of the Yangtze River thrice. The battlefield situation was gradually reversed and the initiative was seized.
To walk around without fighting could be qualified as flightism. To fight without walking could be qualified as risking one's life. Being good at walking alone could not win back the initiative on the battlefield. To annihilate the enemy and to achieve the battle targets, we should also be good at fighting. Fighting was the objective and walking was the means. All the walking simply supported the purpose of fighting, to create battle opportunities by walking, and to achieve the targets by fighting.
After the People's Army had begun to engage in large-scale mobile battles, Mao Zedong directed his consideration on how to fight, and how to fight in a big way. In April of 1947, Jinchaiji military area decided to launch Zhengtai battle. Just before the launching of the battle, the situation changed abruptly and unexpectedly. The KMT army concentrated 7 regiments and mounted assaults on the stronghold of Shengfang Mountain in the liberated area of Hebei. To return to the rescue or to continue the planned battle, Nie Rongzhen and other commanders decided, don't let us be controlled by the enemy. We should continue with our plans and wage the battles. Jinchaiji military area army had accomplished the Phase 1 battle targets. They marched into Shanxi quickly and launched Assault Phase 2. Receiving the report, Mao Zedong instructed Nie Rongzhen by telegram, now you have seized the initiative. If the enemy runs to the rescue in the south, don't mind them and continue to concentrate all your forces to accomplish Zhengtai battle. To fight the weak, then fight the stronger. You fight in your way, I fight in my way. This was the battle policy for a complete initiative. The telegram evidenced for the first time the battle principle of Mao Zedong's you fight in your way, I fight in my way. Jinchaiji military area followed Mao Zedong's instructions. They lured 2 divisions of the KMT army and annihilated them. The whole battle killed 35,000 enemy troops.
The scale of the Zhengtai battle was not large. However, the principle of you fight your way, I fight my way, proposed by Mao Zedong during this battle, had important significance. It was an important development of the principle of fight if you can win, withdraw if you cannot. It signified that Mao Zedong had, as ancient Chinese military classics put it, no ceiling on the above, no flooring on the ground, and no enemy in the front, and had completely seized the initiative of the battle.
Once this operation principle was established, Mao Zedong put it immediately into practice. 2 months later, the attacks by the KMT army against Shandong liberated area and Shanxi, Gansu, Ningxia border area were continued. Mao Zedong, according to the principle of you fight your way, I fight my way, instructed the army to move to the central area of China. There, they launched strategic attacks. They turned the central area of China upside down. The KMT troops, on the other hand, were in a mad rush and ended up in defense of all flanks.
What matters in you fight in your way, I fight in my way, is that there must be something called my way. First of all, don't get entangled with the stronger enemy. Never engage with the enemy in battle at the time, place, and in a manner desired by the enemy. Secondly, contain or provoke the enemy by flexibility and battle. Guide the battle to a direction that is advantageous to us, and engage in a war according to our own rhythm, manner, and completely of our own initiative. One of the important reasons why the People's Army won the battles was the fact that we had our own way, and we had a complete set of strategies, and seized the initiative of the battles.
The purpose of my way was to seize the initiative. However, my way did not mean that we should disregard the performance of the enemy. We should know ourselves and know the enemy. During the War of Land Revolution, Mao Zedong planned the Red Army my way, based on guerrilla warfare. Later, it was based on mobile warfare. This principle had won 4 campaigns against encircling and suppression. After the breaking out of anti-Japanese war, Mao Zedong promoted guerrilla warfare on a strategic level and formed my way as an anti-invasion stratagem unique to China. At the beginning of the War of Liberation, Mao Zedong, after judging the actual situations of the enemy and us, once again modified my way. He integrated mobile warfare, positional warfare, and guerrilla warfare intimately, and employed them flexibly. Fight in one's own way is often discussed by the strategist, but it is very hard to use in practice. Mao Zedong, however, could always make it work wonders. People of later generations realized Mao Zedong was good at troop deployment and could adjust his battle according to the enemy. He was good at troop deployment according to terrain. He fought appropriate battles at different places. He was good at troop deployment according to different times. He fought appropriate battles at different times. He was good at troop deployment according to his own style. He fought appropriate battles according to the situations. He was also good at appointing commanders. In short, he always won battles. With my way, the enemy could be contained. The enemy fought spatially anchored wars. We fought mobile wars. The enemy fought rapid blitz wars. We fought protracted wars. The enemy adopted marching divided, attack converged. We lured the enemy in the depths. We wanted to fight. The enemy was compelled to fight. The enemy wanted to attack us. They failed and could not find us. We wanted to attack them. We could fight to the point and fight at home. Mao Zedong's understanding of strategy had reached a level of following what the heart desires, but not over the rules. He thus created one war miracle after another. In his old age, Mao Zedong still had an unending love for poetry and ancient classical works. He had thus made many a unique comment on historical and contemporary figures. Zhuge Liang was looked up to by citizens as a resourceful and wise strategist. However, Mao Zedong had a different opinion regarding Zhuge Liang's deployment of troops. Guan Yu, Liu Bei, and Zhuge Liang divided the army and each led one troop. It's no wonder that they had been defeated. Mao Zedong praised Li Shemin and Zhu Yuanzhang very highly. From time immemorial, there was no equal to Liu Shemin in military skills, and Zhu Yuanzhang came in second place. Mao Zedong gave plenty of praise to the concentration of forces. He even called it the only correct way of operation. Mao Zedong himself was one master of this ancient principle. He said, "Our strategic principle is that 1 shall rival 10, and our tactic principle is that 10 fight 1. This is one of the basic principles for us to defeat the enemy.